Hello, my name is Jonathan Clark, also known as DJ Bolivia, and for today's video I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how to use the effects on a Pioneer DJM-900 mixer. To give you a little bit of background on the Pioneer mixer line, the first really well-known mixer that they had was the DJM-500 that came out around 1996, and that became a club standard pretty quickly. Only maybe 2 years later, around 1998 I think, the DJM-600 came out, which offered a lot of improvements over the 500. So that became the next industry standard, and that was an industry standard for a long time. Eventually the DJM-800 came out around 2006, and so that kind of took over from the 600, and only a couple years ago the DJM-900 came out to replace the 800. So in between all of those, the four standards, like the 500, 600, 800, 900, there have probably been another dozen mixers in the series in between, but those were kind of the steps that I feel were the most industry recognized mixers during the last 15 years or so. Now, for this video today, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the effects on the mixer. That's the whole point of it. Some of the effects on this mixer are the same as the 600. So rather than going through that whole thing all over again for those effects that are the same, what I recommend is that you watch the video that I made on the effects for the 600 first, because that'll make you understand this mixer a lot better. Now, I've also got another separate video about the effects on the 800. The evolution, obviously the 800 was between the 600 and 900, but you do not have to watch the video I made about the 800 to understand everything here. So just the 600 and this particular video that you're watching right now, you'll understand this mixer quite well. Let's go for a quick tour of the mixer and see what the differences are between this and the 600. Okay, so looking at the back of the mixer, we have quarter-inch stereo inputs and outputs for an external effect of any type. We have 4 channels, and each channel, we've got a couple capable of phono inputs, only 2 on this one. The DJM-600 had 3, but this one's got 2, and the other 2 just have dual line or line CD. We have SPDIF, we have digital inputs for all 4 channels. We have a MIDI out, because this does actually function as a MIDI controller and can send signals outward. We have a microphone jack in the back, a quarter-inch mic. Now there's actually 2 mic jacks, because there's the XLR mic on the front that everyone's used to. And what else do we have? For booth monitors, on the 600 they come out as RCA. On this one they come out as quarter-inch. So make sure you've got a quarter-inch line if you're trying to use monitors. The master, like the 600, you've either got a main master output with XLR cords, or you can use the RCA. There's a second set. There's also a record out, similar to the 600. Okay, so basically that's everything on the back. Oh, and of course there's the LAN link cable, which lets this mixer talk directly to some of the high-end Pioneer CDJ players, like the 2000 Nexus. Looking at the front of the unit, very similar layout to the 600, just a few changes. This one is black. Some of the 600s were black and some of them were silver. We've got our same mic port as before, but because we've got that second mic in the back, we have 2 level controls for the microphone. And unlike the 600, there's only low and high EQ controls. The 600 had a mid control too, but that's not that important. We have, instead of on the 600, to turn the mic off, you just turn the volume down all the way on the pot knob. For this one, you can actually turn it off. So off, on, talk over. 600 had a talk over button that you press down. Now the talk over, it's interesting because you can go into the menu of this and there are different talk over settings. So the default talk over is the same as on a DJM-600. There's an advanced talk over mode, so basically the standard talkover, what happens is when you press that, your other signals going through the mixer are decreased so that your voice naturally comes out over the top because everything else is quieter. The advanced talkover mode, if you choose to use that, instead of decreasing everything in the other signals, it only decreases the mid-range frequencies where people's voices usually are. So that's kind of an interesting approach to things, and I like it. Underneath the microphone section, we have the color effects, which I'll come back to. That's the main point of the video. We have this link button. Basically, you can queue tracks on CDJ players. If you've got external CDJs hooked up directly to this mixer, you can queue directly from those. We have the same headphone section as on the 600, same type of headphone jack, not an 1/8 inch jack, just a 1/4 inch jack. Kind of surprised that they didn't change that. Crossfader looks the same, but the crossfader setup is not quite the same. If you remember on the 600, the crossfader was assigned, each of the two sides of the crossfader was assigned to a specific channel. So you could put the A to any of the 4 channels, and you could put the B side to any of the 4 channels. However, on this mixer, rather than the assignment being tied directly to the fader, to the crossfader, the assignments are on each channel and are then tied to the fader. So that means that for each separate channel, you pick A or B, or through, as in it doesn't matter. Why is this important? It seems to increase the complexity because now we've got 4 switches instead of 2, but this is good because this now means that you can assign multiple channels to a specific side of the mixer. So before, on your B side of your mixer, you had to pick which of the 4 channels would play on the B side. But with this setup, you could actually set 3 of the 4 to all play on the B side if you want, which is kind of neat, especially when we get into the effects. So I'll mention that in a second. Queuing is the same. This line of color knobs is tied into the sound color effects, which I'll talk about in a minute. We still have low, mid, and high EQs on each channel. The only difference is that there is a way to set this now. With the 600, each of these specific controls, the attenuation, the maximum attenuation was a drop of 26 decibels on the channel. If you want to set it differently, instead of only attenuating down 26 decibels, you can now set it to infinity, which means effectively this is like a cutoff switch on the EQ. And let me play you an example. So here's that switch. So isolator means cut off to infinity. EQ means go the regular way, the same style as the 600 EQs. So let's try that. Set to EQ right now. If I turn them all down, you see everything's been attenuated 26 decibels, but there's still some coming through. Yet if I switch to isolator, it's completely cut out. Okay, so complete cutoff switch. Trim knobs, yeah, same as the 600. Our channel selector switches, each one has digital for the SPDIF inputs on the back, CD or line, depending on what you put up, which you're plugged into here, phono on the 2 outside ones, and finally USB channels. Now this is kind of cool. This mixer weighs about twice as much as the 600, and the reason for that is because there's much more stuff in this. This mixer, it acts as a MIDI controller, and it also has an internal sound card. And it's a pretty good sound card, 2496 capability for signal flow. So basically that means 96 kilohertz sample frequency and 24-bit sample size. I've got another video about sampling, understanding sampling, so you should watch that if you want to learn more about that. Anyway, so it's a 2496 sound card. The mixer itself, speaking of sampling, the mixer itself has a 32-bit output, So you might think, well, that's odd, because if you've got signal flow at 24 bits, then bumping it up to 32 is not going to make the signal any better. But you've got to understand, there is a reason for that. The short answer is that if you think about 24-bit as a series of separate intervals, different steps at which a signal strength can be communicated, if you're mixing two signals together, it's not completely additive. The way sound works, it works on a logarithmic scale. So basically adding two different 24-bit sound signals together does not result in even numbers that match that 24-bit. You can have like fractions of 24 bits. And that's why having the extra width, the extra resolution of 32-bit can actually sound a tiny bit better. Now, it's not really too obvious to most people's untrained ears. I'll try and explain that more in the sampling video. Anyway, the end result is that the mixer sounds pretty good. Let's just leave it at that. Master output is the same, well, no, it's not the same as the 600, because the 600 had a slider. This one has a pot knob up at the top, and this one, the mono stereo switch, is down here at the bottom. Okay, but there's still a pan knob, still have the ability to cue. Channel fader settings. To the right, we've got a linear curve, which means as you raise the fader, the sound increases in a kind of linear fashion. But you can also have it so that you have a curve that starts out fairly flat and then goes up very quickly at the end, which means you'd be hearing tiny increase, tiny increase, tiny increase, tiny increase, then all of a sudden whoosh, then the sound really comes up in that last little bit. And there's a middle setting, which is halfway between the two. Crossfader, same sort of thing with crossfader curves. You can have linear curves, you can have sharp curves, and you can have exponential curves. Okay, coming over onto the right side of the mixer, we do have a similar look at the bottom here. The level depth knob is the same. The time knob is a little bit different because this one spins a lot more easily than on the 600. Our assignments are pretty much the same. Now, I mentioned that the new crossfader layout is kind of advantageous when you're in your effects section, which is now called the beat effects. The reason for that is if you assign effects to crossfader A, and you happen to have two of your channels assigned to crossfader A, that means you can apply an effect to two of the four channels at the same time. Whereas before, with the 600, you could only pick a single specific channel, or you could pick the master to cover everything. But with this one, say you've got 3 songs going, it is possible now to put effects on 2 of them simultaneously and not the other. So that's cool. Skipping over the beat effects for a second, we have a better display of everything, certainly. We also have this thing called the X-Pad, CrossPad, and this is basically a touch controller. You can see how it's moving there, and that lets me play with my effects a lot more quickly than I used to be able to with just the rotary knobs. Alright, so before I really get into the other effects, one thing I should point out, there are a couple things missing from the beat effects on this one compared to the 600. We no longer have the auto BPM setting on our effects knob over here, but we do have a way of choosing the of setting the BPM here. So let's say that we want to, well, okay, sorry, the mixer still reads the BPM by itself, and it tries to do that based on what channel is playing through it. If it can figure it out, it will show the BPM in a solid figure. If it can't, it'll flash, which means it doesn't know for sure what the exact BPM is. And it's usually pretty good at a range from, I think, 70 to 130 or 140 is the best range for trying to figure out the BPMs. I guess 140 makes more sense, because once you get past 140, it might be confusing it with half that speed. So 142 it might think is 71. Anyway, so BPMs though, for some of the effects, if you want to set the BPM, you can hold down the tap button and change the time, and you can see how I'm changing the BPM there that I want. That's for effects that are synchronized to a specific tempo. You can also, let's say that the BPM I want is 127.4, and obviously I can't get that. I can only go to 127 or 128. But if you actually hold down this button at the same time, you can set tenths of a BPM. So now I can get 127.4, which is nice. The sampler section of the effects is sort of missing. It's different. There are new sample-based effects. The melodic, slip roll, roll, and reverse roll are all sample-based. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So as I've said, most of the effects on the 900 are similar to the 600. So delay, echo, trance, filter, flanger are all pretty much the same. I'm not going to talk about those right now. Reverb. Reverb is found on the 600, but it has changed a little bit coming to this mixer. Okay, so let's just try and... Okay, I've got this CD player assigned to channel 3. So we've got reverb set, channel 3. Okay, that doesn't sound much different. But if you change your time, you can change the frequency of your reverb tails. Okay, so that's kind of neat. Now, the spiral. The spiral is basically a reverb effect, but it adds a slight delay, so you'll get an echo. So let's take a listen and see what happens. You can also adjust the time, which raises the pitch, or you can move it to the right to decrease the pitch. Now, let me show you something that's neat with this thing because of the X-Pad. When I press it, it lights up. You no longer have to press the on-off button, start it flashing, to turn an effect on. If that is solid, which means the effect is not turned on, you can turn the effect on simply by touching the X-Pad and moving your finger back and forth. So let's give that a shot. Okay, so off, nothing, but that's because our level was not turned up. We turned the level up. So same thing, to the right, decreases pitch, left, increases. Okay, so that's how the spiral works. Reverb, trance, filter, flange are all the same. Phaser. Okay, so a phaser. Do you know what a phaser is? It's very similar to a flanger. Can I tell you the difference? Not easily. Basically what happens with a phaser, with a flanger, is a signal is duplicated and it's delayed a tiny bit. And so the two wave forms of the two signals, of your dry and your wet signal, because they are separated by a small fraction of time, they sometimes go out of phase. Basically, the two frequencies have to get added together, and so it will change the resulting frequency. A flanger starts to become fairly noticeable, well, a bit noticeable, with a delay of maybe as little as 4 to 6 milliseconds. Before that, the two signals are so close together that there's not a lot of change. But once you get up to a few more milliseconds, they start to get staggered enough that you get a big different sound. So this is the sound. Okay, now the difference between a flanger and a phaser is the same principle is applied to both, but for a flanger, the entire wave gets shifted at the same time. Every frequency the same amount. With a phaser, only some of the frequencies are shifted. So it could be that there's a notch, a single part of the spectrum that's shifted. So if you can imagine, what if you had a range from trebles to mids to lows, and only one part of that, only the mids, were shifted? That's basically what a phaser does. It shifts part of the frequency spectrum, but not the entire thing. And so phasers can have different amounts of if you can imagine a comb shape, they can have different numbers of teeth. The phaser changes can be changing in frequency and in time. So they might get modulated by a LFO, low frequency oscillator. So basically what this means is a phaser is kind of like a more complex flanger. Flanger, whole thing shifted all at once, all the same amount. Phaser, different parts getting shifted. So it's a little bit fancier. Let's try. So you get a little bit more of an evolving sound with the phaser than you do with the flanger, depending on the setting. Okay, robot voice. Let's see what this, let's find a song that's got some vocals. And
When Saturday night came, I was so excited. I got there an hour before the doors even opened.
so basically what we're doing is we're adding a warbling to the signal that's coming through. And the level depth knob will change. It's kind of like a resonance setting. So as you move it over to max, you'll get the most. Okay, but you can also change the time, which changes the repitching. So you can go down a lot lower or a lot higher. Okay, so that's how the robot voice works. Okay, so looking into the next section, we have 4 effects here: melodic, slip roll, roll, and reverse roll. These are all sampler-based effects. So let's do an example of how to record. Let's put it on roll, a simple one, and I'm going to set it. This sets the length of time that you're going to record. So at the present, it's only 1/8 of a beat, 1/4 of a beat. Sorry, 1/8 of a bar, which is a half note, which is a eighth note. 1/4 of a bar, which is a quarter note. Half a bar, half note. 1 bar, 2 bars, 4 bars, 8 bars. Let's go with a full 8 bars. That probably will illustrate this the best. So as soon as I start holding this down, signal is going to start being recorded until I let go. As soon as I let go, it will start playing that back. The maximum amount of time is the 8 bars. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit on off here to start recording at the same time as I start playing the introductory couple bars of this. 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so right now it's recorded that, so I'm going to stop this But you can hear that the sample is still playing in the background. It just keeps looping that. Okay, so when I'm at minimum, nothing of the sample is coming through the channel. I can switch to another channel and start playing something. But if I pause that and turn this up, the sample that I've recorded is still playing. And so I can actually mix the two of those together. Of course, I have to get the timing right on everything. But anyway, that's how the sampler has basically been changed. So roll is the standard way. Reverse roll, that's obvious, that's a reverse. Slip roll, you start recording, and when you change the time, it will start recording at that different time. So it gives you a kind of it gives you a slip roll. Okay. So anyway, that's how those effects are set up. The best way to deal with all of those is to play with them. With those sample-based effects, the best way is to read the manual. Pioneer has a really quite decent manual, actually, for these things. And so if you read the manual and play with it, you'll understand more. Okay, so let me show you some stuff with the sound color effects next. That's the stuff that looks really new. All 6 of them, they are either on or off. You cannot have 2 on at once. If you turn something on, it turns off any other one that might be playing at the time. Okay. The 6 sound color effects, each of them is only controlled by the color knob, nothing else. This part of things does not affect these. The color settings do not affect this. Is that good? It seems less powerful. Well, actually it's more powerful, because that means that you can layer effects down here and color effects at the same time. So you can mix and match any beat effect with any color effect at once. Okay, so let's listen and see what these things do. Our first one is the space effect. Okay. Oh, turned on. Okay, so you hear those 2 different sounds. Basically, when you're turning to the left, this is a reverb effect. When you're turning to the left, the reverb is being applied to low and mid frequencies only, and you can hear the high is coming through untouched. Turn it to the right, and the reverb is being applied only to the high and mid frequencies, nothing else. Let's turn that off. Actually, let's try this. Turn it off this way. The effect gradually fades out. You can also fade it out quickly by going back to your center position, or you can go with a combination. You can have it start to fade out by itself and then speed it up quickly by going back to the center position. Okay, next effect is the dub echo, and this is basically an echo with a slight delay. And attenuation. So what happens if you move it to the left? The echo is getting applied to the mid-range. You can hear the bass and the trebles still coming through clearly. And if you turn it to the right, it's applied to the high range. Ah, that's kind of neat, eh? Okay, so same thing with this. If you turn it on, you can turn it off quickly by getting rid of by putting your color knob back to the center. You can turn it off more slowly, let it fade out, by turning off the on-off switch. But because this is a post-fader effect, if you have it running and turn the signal of the channel off, you'll hear the effect slowly fading out. So that's a good way to get a better understanding for what the sound of the effect is like. Okay, and it also means, let's say that you had 2 CDs going, you had another song going in channel 1, you could do stuff like and of course the space effect, same thing, post fader. Okay, so these two are fairly similar in the way everything is treated. Now, let's go into the gate compressor. That's pretty simple. Left is gate, right is compressor. So listen. As you turn it to the left, you increase the gating effect. So what does that mean? If you understand how effects work, basically turning to the left raises the threshold below which sound gets cancelled. Okay, so that's why when you've got a high threshold, not much of the sound is getting through, only the peaks. But as you lower the threshold, less is getting squashed until you're back to normal. On the compressor side, to the right, okay, so what's changing there? Is it the threshold or is it the ratio of a compressor? Well, if you listen to that and then try it at a lower level, it has the same sort of effect, which means that the threshold must be tied to your channel fader, and it's actually the ratio that is changing as you are moving this. So you can hear more of the lower stuff is being raised up. And actually what's happening, if you understand compression squashes the signal. So it must be that as this knob increases, not only is the ratio increasing, which means the signal is getting squashed more, but the output gain must be rising at the same time as the ratio is increasing and the squishing is happening to keep the top at the same level overall. And then it would be just the lower threshold would be changed on your fader. Okay, so that's the gate compressor. White noise. White noise is added when you play with the knob. Now, why is this interesting? Well, because if nothing's playing in the channel, this is the only one of the color effects, because it's adding something by itself, it's generating white noise. Every other effect works by changing the signal coming through the mixer. This one it's generating white noise out of nothing, which means even when there's nothing playing, you can create white noise. Okay? And the two of them sound a little bit different. That's because on the left side, your cutoff frequency decreases. So it's like a low pass or a high cut, where the frequency is decreasing. So you only get the low frequencies here. And on this side, the cutoff frequency is increasing on a high pass. Okay? So when you start off, sorry, did I say that right? The cutoff frequency is decreasing. It starts at a low level, so not a lot of the highs are getting through, but then that cutoff frequency increases and more of the highs are getting through. So, can you do that in two channels at once? Yes, you can. So that's kind of neat, because you can have a channel playing and you can have white noise in a different channel. And that means you can change your volume of your white noise without having to change the volume of your song playing. Okay. What happens if you fade it out quickly? Well, it disappears right away, because the amount of the white noise is controlled by the fader volume. Okay. Moving on to crush. This is a simple bit crusher, and if you turn it to the left, what's happening is just a classic increasing amount of crushing or of distortion. If you turn it to the right, you're getting crushing, but you're also getting a high pass. So it's only the highest signals coming through as you turn up to the high setting. Finally, the filter. Pretty straightforward filter effect. On the left side, you have a low-pass filter, and so as you sweep to the left, your cutoff frequency is disappearing. And on the right, you have a high-pass filter. So go back to the white noise. So it kind of behaves the same way as for the noise effect, except the noise effect has the noise. Okay, so I think that's really all you need to know. I mean, the best thing to do is to play with it. I've given you kind of a quick background on how each of the effects works. You can read the manual to understand them a little bit better. There's different stuff. I guess I didn't mention too, if you actually got this linked up to some of the other nice CD players like the 2000s or the 2000 Nexus, actually only to the Nexus I think, you can have fader starts. So you can assign it so that, say, there's a track queued up in a CD player and you don't have to press start on that. You can have it so that as soon you've got the fader start set, so as soon as you start to move the fader up, the track starts to play. And if you turn it off entirely, the track stops and you can start it again. So it's kind of like for beat juggling, you can kind of keep starting the track over and over again with using the fader, which is quite neat. And you can also assign that to the crossfader. Anyway, yeah, I think that's just about it. If you want to see a good video from somebody who is much more skilled at the sampling effects side of this mixer than I am, go to the Pioneer DJ channel on YouTube and check out the video that they recorded with James Ibella and Nick Fanciulli. And I think you'll be quite impressed with the stuff there. So check them out. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching.